Have you ever been judged? Not for what you did, but for who you are. Imagine boarding a first-class flight, a rare quiet moment after months of endless work and before you can even buckle your seatbelt. Someone leans over and says, "Excuse me, you're in the wrong seat." Now imagine that someone is the head flight attendant, and the person demanding your seat, a wealthy executive who thinks you don't look like you belong in 1A. What would you do? Would you argue? Would you swallow your pride just to avoid a scene? Or would you stay calm and let your silence speak louder than any shout ever could? That's exactly what Dr. Maya Ellis did, a black CEO, sitting quietly in her assigned VIP seat, until a moment of humiliation revealed something far deeper, the truth about how people see power, privilege, and dignity. In the next few minutes, a single choice. Her choice would flip the entire flight upside down. A choice between staying silent or standing up. Between anger and grace. Between reacting or redefining respect itself. If you were in her place, what would you do when the world told you to move? Would you stay seated? Knowing your calm might just change everything. Stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a flight. It's about what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will make you believe that dignity can fly higher than any plane. A soft buzzer sounded, signaling the imminent departure of AeroVista Flight 231 from Los Angeles to New York. In the first-class cabin, a pale yellow light reflected off the dark brown leather seats. Passengers were packing their bags. The sound of seatbelts being buckled echoed softly like the opening bars of a familiar song. In seat 1A, a middle-aged black woman sat quietly. Her hair was tied back. She wore a simple gray jacket. No brand, no gold jewelry. She had her laptop open, her eyes focused but calm. Her name was Dr. Maya Ellis. She didn't look around, nor did she seem to want to attract attention. But from that moment on, the entire cabin would never forget that face. A stewardess, Mark Reynolds, tall, with a stern face, stepped forward. His voice was soft, but there was something about the way he said it that made the atmosphere tense. "Miss," he bowed. "We need to discuss your chair." Maya looked up, her eyes calm. "Yes. What is it?" "We have a special passenger, Mrs. Charlotte Kane, just boarding. She usually sits in 1A on our flights. Could you please move her to 3C? For easier service." Maya looked across the row. It was a white woman, about 55, wearing large sunglasses and carrying a bright orange Hermes handbag. She was talking loudly on the phone, gesturing to the attendants around her. "My ticket is 1A, Maya said softly. "I like sitting here." Mark smiled wryly. "I understand. But this guest is an elite diamond member. We have a priority policy." "What policy allows you to take a seat from a paying passenger?" Maya asked, her voice calm, not high, but with weight. Mark paused, then spoke more quickly. "You know, some people bring more value to the firm than others." At that moment, several nearby passengers looked up. A silence fell. Maya looked straight at him, her deep black eyes showing no anger, only something indescribable, the calmness of someone used to suffering. "Value," she repeated, "is sometimes not in first class. Mark." He was slightly startled when she called him by his name, but before he could ask, Charlotte stepped forward, her voice high and clear. "Sir, I don't understand why it's taking so long. I always sit here, and I don't like to wait." Maya turned back, her face still calm. Charlotte looked her up and down, her eyes a mixture of surprise and contempt. "Oh," she said, I thought this seat was for business travelers. I guess someone made a mistake." A cold gust of air cut through. Mark looked around, confused, but kept his smile stiff. "Mrs. Kane." "I'm working on it." Maya gently closed her laptop. "There's no mistake," she said. "I booked this seat 2 weeks ago. I'm staying here." Charlotte raised her eyebrows, her voice turning fake sweet. "Do you know who I am?" "No need to know," Maya replied. A few people in first class glanced around, pretending to read magazines. The silence was as heavy as a thick fog. Mark leaned over and said softly, "You should cooperate, ma'am. I don't want to cause trouble." "The trouble doesn't come from me," Maya replied, "but from how you intend to treat me," she said, then turned away, opening her laptop again. Charlotte took a deep breath, then said the last sentence. "People like you always think they deserve more." Mark gently took Charlotte's hand, temporarily moving her away, but his eyes still glanced back at Maya, a slightly annoyed look in them. When they were gone, Maya breathed slowly. Outside the window, the 2-mile runway appeared, reflecting the California morning sun. A boy in economy class pressed his face against the window, pointing out, saying to his mother, "That plane is so beautiful." Maya smiled. She loved little moments like that, when people looked up instead of down. The loudspeaker blared, the female pilot's voice announcing that the weather in New York was good. The flight was expected to arrive in 5:30. Maya closed her eyes for a few seconds. Little did she know that in less than 6 hours, this flight would become the biggest test of her life, a challenge not only to a CEO's power, but to a man's dignity. That morning, as the Los Angeles sun streamed through the thick glass of LAX, Dr. Maya Ellis arrived early. She was not the type to arrive late to the airport, nor was she one to attract attention. For her, the quiet moments before a trip were always precious, like a few minutes of deep breathing before entering a battle. She sat in the waiting area, sipping black coffee from a paper cup, watching the bustling crowd before her. A middle-aged man argued with the check-in staff about overweight luggage. A young mother holding a baby, coaxing her child while looking for the boarding gate. A group of young people in company uniforms, laughing and talking loudly. Maya liked to watch them because in each face there was a little story. Sometimes joy, sometimes fatigue. That was what she wanted her airline to remember: stories. AeroVista Airlines was more than just an airline. For Maya, it was her brainchild, a dream she had nurtured for more than 20 years. Born in the suburbs of Atlanta, she grew up in a family of modest means. Her father, Samuel Ellis, was a mechanic in an old aircraft repair shop. Every night, he would bring home greasy notebooks, draw propeller structures, and explain to a 12-year-old girl how jet engines worked. "When you understand what makes an airplane powerful," he once said, "you will understand what makes a man fly." Those words have stayed with Maya to this day. She was an aeronautical engineer working for a large airline in Texas, but after 10 years, she realized she wanted to do more than design planes. She wanted to change the way people were treated when they flew. She wanted an airline where flight attendants treated customers with respect, not with membership cards. AeroVista was born from that dream. At first, it was just a small company with a few domestic roots. But when Maya ran it, she focused on the human experience rather than profits. Employees were trained not only in service skills, but also in empathy, learning to listen and see customers as living stories. The airline grew rapidly, becoming a new symbol of human service. Then, in the past 3 years, As Maya was busy expanding, the culture began to change. Some new executives were focused solely on revenue, and elite diamond customers became the measure of success. She listened to internal reports, read passenger feedback, and realized something terrifying. AeroVista was slowly forgetting its reason for existence. Maya decided to take an anonymous trip, a flight like any other passenger, to see for herself what was happening. This morning was the trip. She chose seat 1A not because she wanted luxury, but because it was close to the cockpit, where she could observe how the flight attendants interacted with the passengers. She bought the ticket under the name of M. Ellis, no PhD title, no status, a secret itinerary, known only to her personal assistant, an hour before her flight. Maya walked the AeroVista boarding area at LAX. She quietly observed the staff. A young flight attendant smiled wryly when a passenger asked for an extra blanket. A ticket counter attendant frowned when an elderly passenger asked for directions. None of them were rude, but there was something mechanical and cold about their smiles. She felt like she was looking at a mirror of her past, herself 10 years ago, when work made people forget their hearts. Maya thought of the leadership team back at Atlanta. They often talked about premium customers as a list, not as people. Every meeting lately had been about quarterly profits, red and green charts, and less about passengers. She remembered her last argument with the chairman of the board, Philip Grant. "We can't treat everyone the same. Maya, that's a business reality." She replied, "No, Philip, it's a choice, and I choose not to make this airline a class barometer." The meeting ended in silence, but she knew that if she wanted to change, she needed proof, and that proof, she thought, would be on board today. Maya never thought this test would come so quickly. When she was asked to give up her seat to make way for another passenger, she knew it was a sign of things to come. She wasn't angry, not surprised, just deeply sad. She had told her managers that service culture could reflect the soul of an organization. Today, she saw that soul, and it was lost. She leaned her head back in her seat and looked out the small window. The other AeroVista planes were parked in a row on the runway, the sunlight glinting off their shiny metal bodies. She remembered the airline's first day, when there were only 4 old planes, the team of engineers working all night to make it to the inaugural flight. That day, she had said to the entire staff, "If one day we forget why we fly, all flights will be nothing more than soulless metal boxes." At this moment, those words rang in her mind like a reminder. A boy walked by, looked at Maya, and smiled. He was wearing an AeroVista jacket, probably the son of an employee. Maya leaned down and smiled back. In those childish eyes, she saw her own childhood. A girl who believed that anyone could sit in the front row if they tried hard enough. The feeling warmed her heart and drove away some of her fatigue. The boarding call came through the loudspeaker. Maya closed her computer, checked her ticket, and walked slowly toward the boarding gate. The line of people in front of her had different purposes. A woman carrying a small suitcase, seemingly on a business trip. An elderly man walking slowly with a cane. A young man wearing headphones, nodding along to the music. They were all the same at this moment, people preparing to fly. Maya looked at her watch. Flight AV231 was leaving at 9:45 a.m. She took a deep breath, smelled the coffee, the speakers, the wheels rolling across the floor. Everything was familiar, but there was a vague feeling in her stomach, like a premonition that today would be more than just a trip. As she scanned her ticket through the machine, the boarding clerk, a man named Ethan Lopez, smiled politely. He didn't recognize her, but simply said the familiar words, "Have a safe flight." She replied, "Thank you." Ethan, Her voice was soft, but it took Ethan by surprise. There was something about the woman's eyes that made him feel at peace. Little did he know that, just a few hours later, that smile would change the course of his career. Entering the first-class cabin, Maya placed her bag in the overhead compartment and sat down in seat 1A. She took a deep breath of the leather seat, opened her laptop, and typed a few notes observing flight AV231. Objective real-life experience. Do not reveal your identity. She saved the file, naming it simply Flight Report. Then she leaned back and closed her eyes. Footsteps sounded from behind her. A familiar male voice she didn't recognize, Mark Reynolds, was approaching. And in a few minutes, her world would begin to shake. But right now, she didn't know it. She was just a woman in the front row, carrying a dream that soared beyond all preconceptions. The plane shuddered as it turned onto the runway. The engines roared, a familiar noise echoing through the first-class cabin. Maya Ellis looked out the window, the sunlight reflecting off the shiny metal of the wings. People began to settle down, seat belts clicking, flight attendants checking. In that moment, she suddenly remembered the early days when AeroVista was just an idea on a piece of paper, a small dream in a fierce aviation market. When Maya left her engineering job in Texas, everyone called her crazy. A black woman, from a modest background, without wealthy parents, without investors, wanting to start an airline. It sounded far-fetched, but Maya didn't see the world through the limited lens of others. She believed that anything could start small if you persevered. She sold her first apartment in Dallas, scraped together every penny of savings, and in a friend's tiny garage, she and 3 other engineers planned to build an airline based on a human service model. No one thought they would last more than a year. But 3 years later, AeroVista was born. With its first flight connecting Atlanta and Denver, Maya still remembers that opening day vividly. The sky was clear, the wind was light. An old Boeing 737 had been repainted in AeroVista's signature silver blue. As the plane took off, she burst into tears. It was the moment she knew she was not just creating a company, but opening a space where people could be seen and heard. Over time, AeroVista grew. From 4 old planes, the airline owned a fleet of more than 70 in just 8 years. Maya worked 16 hours a day, traveling everywhere to sign contracts, recruit people, even interviewing each of the first flight attendants herself. She taught them not only how to smile, but how to be sincere. Don't bow your head because the customer has a VIP card. She once said in training, bow your head because it shows respect for people. Those words became the AeroVista culture, the thing that made customers love and stick with them. But success brought its shadow. When the company went public, new shareholders came in. They talked about metrics, profits, market share. They wanted AeroVista to be a luxury brand, not an airline for everyone. Maya had warned many times, but the financial pressure made her voice gradually fade in the boardroom. They added ticket classes, created special privileges, separated passengers by spending level. She felt it was slowly killing the soul that she and her original team had built. The night before her flight, Maya sat alone in her Atlanta office. The city lights streamed in through the large glass windows, reflecting off her tired face. On her desk was a customer service report with numbers that troubled her satisfaction ratings down. Complaints about customer service up. She flipped through the pages, her eyes lingering on the passenger comments. I used to love AeroVista because I felt valued. One person wrote, now I just feel compared. Another, I can't afford to be a VIP. But I don't deserve to be invisible. Those words left her speechless for a long time. She got up from her chair and walked down the long hallway, where a large photograph of the airline's opening day hung. She stood there, looking at her youthful face from 10 years ago, filled with confidence. Then she whispered to herself, "I've gone too far." Maya. She knew that if she wanted to save AeroVista's soul, she would have to do something unusual. A secret flight, an unannounced test that was the only way she could see the truth. Now, sitting in the front row, she felt the invisible chill of discrimination. Just because she dressed modestly, people thought she didn't belong. A lingering wound that many people of color carry throughout their lives, being judged by their appearance rather than their inner abilities. Maya was no stranger to this. When she was young, her boss had dismissed her idea because it didn't fit the company's style. A year later, that same idea was copied and won an award. She didn't blame anyone. She just learned to remember the world isn't fair, but people can choose to be fair in how they act. The waitresses began handing out drinks. Maya took the water, thanking him politely. Mark walked by, nodding politely, but his eyes avoided eye contact. She recognized it as a sign of defensiveness. When people feared power, they avoided eye contact. When people despised you, they saw right through you. Mark was somewhere in between. She opened her laptop and wrote a few lines in the report. Service attitude is clearly differentiated by appearance. Human feeling is replaced by an impersonal system of rules. She typed and then stopped, erasing the last line. Don't write when hot. She had learned that after many years of leadership when angry, the writing is no longer fair. She wondered if people like Mark knew what they were betraying. Maybe they were just following policy, or afraid of losing their jobs. Maya understood that mistakes in organizational culture don't come from one person, but from a system. But any system starts with a small action, a contemptuous look, or a disrespectful word. In first class, the engine hummed steadily. A passenger next to her opened a magazine about the 10 most powerful CEOs of the year. Maya glanced at it, then smiled. She had appeared on that list 2 years ago, under the title, "The Woman Who Changed America's Sky." She wasn't proud of it. The title didn't reflect what she wanted. She just wanted to build a place where anyone could fly without having to prove their worth. Maya closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the engine and the soft voices of the passengers. She thought of her mother, the woman who had taught her to be kind, even when the world was not as she wished. "Don't let the anger of others make you lose your gentleness," her mother had said. Maya felt a mixture of sadness, a tinge of pride, and a silent promise. Whatever happened today, she would not let her heart become hardened. A small chime sounded, signaling the flight was stable at 36,000 feet. Mark stepped out and began serving. Charlotte Kane sat in row 2A, laughing and talking to someone on the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They put me behind a jerk again," she said, glancing at Maya. She heard every word, but only smiled. Some battles don't require a response. They require the right moment. And Maya knew that moment was coming. In the back, Ethan was packing the passenger's luggage. He glanced up and caught Maya's eye. She nodded slightly. A simple gesture, but enough to put him at ease. He didn't know who the woman was, but he sensed one thing: she exuded the calmness of someone who had weathered many storms. The flight continued. Outside were white clouds that stretched for hundreds of miles. On the ground, small cities gradually disappeared. Maya watched, her heart suddenly heavy. AeroVista was flying high, but did she still remember why she started? In the cabin? Charlotte laughed again. Mark served her wine with exaggerated deference. The sight prompted Maya to make a final note on her computer. When people forget their purpose, power becomes a mask that hides their dignity. And it was at that moment she knew that AeroVista's real test had begun. Dawn in Los Angeles always comes later than elsewhere, or at least it feels that way. The morning light is held back by the tall buildings, filtering through the cracks of glass windows before reaching the stone floors of LAX International Airport. Dr. Maya Ellis walked into the AeroVista Airlines check-in area. The smell of coffee mixed with the loudspeakers and the rolling of suitcases creating a familiar cacophony. She pulled her suitcase lightly, walking leisurely, blending into the crowd like an ordinary passenger. Up ahead, the AeroVista check-in counter glowed with its signature silver-blue logo. A long line was waiting. Maya watched as the counter staff interacted with the passengers. Some smiled awkwardly. Others avoided eye contact. A middle-aged woman asked about her luggage, and the staff answered briefly in a flat, emotionless voice. Maya saw the weariness of the system, where people worked like machines, losing the warmth she had tried to build. She walked to the first-class counter, where there were only a few people. A young clerk, his name tag reading Ethan Lopez, greeted her politely. He had a genuine smile and bright eyes, a contrast to the cold faces around him. Maya smiled back. Ethan entered his ticket information, then looked up and said softly, "Miss Ellis, do you have any checked baggage?" She shook her head. "No, I only have my hand luggage." "Thank you." He printed out his boarding pass and placed it gently on the counter. "Gate B12 boarding at 9:15. Ma'am, have a good flight." She replied, "Thanks. Ethan." As she walked away, his eyes followed her for a second, as if sensing that this woman was different from the other passengers. Maya stopped at a coffee shop near the gate. The smell of espresso wafted through the air. She ordered a black coffee, no sugar, a habit she'd had for years. While she waited, she checked her phone for emails. A message from Atlanta headquarters appeared. President Philip Grant requests a briefing on the new VIP loyalty program. She skimmed through it, then sighed. It was the policy that worried her, a system of privilege that privileged VIPs, sometimes at the expense of respect for others. A group of AeroVista uniformed staff sat nearby, eating breakfast and chatting. Maya overheard them mention the name Mark Reynolds, the chief flight attendant of Flight AV231. "He's a tough guy," one girl said, "but he knows how to please VIPs." The other replied, "Yeah. I heard he even got a letter of praise from Charlotte Kane, the senator's wife. Not many people get that." They chuckled, then continued talking about how Mrs. Kane had once requested a mid-flight meal change, and Mark had complied, even though it wasn't on the menu. Maya was silent. The name Charlotte Kane brought to mind recent complaints about discrimination on AeroVista flights. Passengers complained of being asked to leave their seats to make way for VIPs. Others said they were ignored when they asked for assistance because they were not on the priority list. All these pieces of information came together to form the picture she feared most AeroVista was losing its soul. When the coffee was served, Maya sat in the corner near the glass door. Outside, the runway stretched out. Planes of many airlines lined up. Each one had a symbol, a story. She saw the AeroVista AV231 painted silver blue, being refueled. She smiled slightly. No matter what happened, she was proud of the company she had built. It was not perfect, but it was a dream built on faith. The clock read 8:45. She packed her things and headed towards Gate B12. The line of people waiting for boarding had already begun to form. A small sign in front of her read, "Priority for VIPs and Elite Diamond members." A staff member was controlling the flow of people, his voice stiff as he said, "Please wait behind for economy class passengers. We will call you later." Maya stood still for a moment, watching the people behind her purse their lips and retreat, some of them shaking their heads slightly. When it was her turn, Ethan was the one to scan her ticket. "Welcome, Miss Ellis, to Flight AV31. He smiled. Maya returned the look with a friendly, "Thank you, Ethan." He bowed slightly, his smile still there, in stark contrast to the tense atmosphere around him. As she stepped through the boarding gate, Maya took a deep breath of the distinctive scent of first class, the smell of new leather seats, the faint scent of perfume in the air. She placed her bag in the overhead compartment and sat down in seat 1A. Chief Flight Attendant Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the cabin, his appearance neat, his face cold. He glanced at Maya, then back at the other passengers. She sensed something in that look, the unconscious judgment she had encountered hundreds of times in her life. A moment later, Charlotte Kane stepped onto the platform. White coat, large sunglasses, glittering heels. She was talking on the phone, her voice booming, causing a few passengers to turn to look. Mark hurried over to greet her, bowing. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Kane. We have your usual seat. 1A. Charlotte removed her sunglasses, a smile flickering before fading when she saw Maya sitting there. "What's wrong?" "Mark," she asked. "I always sit in 1A. Mark looked at her, then at Maya. "Yes, I'll take care of it." He walked over, crouched down next to Maya, and said in a low voice, "Ma'am, I need to discuss seating." Maya looked up. She recognized that tone, both soft and hard, the familiar way of speaking of those who believe they have the right to give orders. "Yes," she said, her eyes still calm. "We have a special customer, Mrs. Kane, who flies with us often. She is usually in seat 1A. Could you please change to 3C? I guarantee the service will be the same." Maya looked straight at him. "I booked ticket 1A. I want to stay here." Mark frowned, then tried to keep his voice even. "I understand, but she's an elite diamond guest. You know the priority policy." "What policy allows you to take a seat from a paying passenger?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp. Mark looked a little embarrassed, trying to smile. "We just want to bring the best experience to the people who have contributed so much to the company. So the rest of us don't deserve to be treated well." A few nearby passengers began to notice. The atmosphere in the cabin became tense. Charlotte stood back, arms crossed, lips pursed. Mark looked around, then whispered, "Please cooperate. Don't let things get tense. I'm just following the rules." Maya looked at him for a few more seconds, then smiled slightly. "There are rules that exist just to test our conscience." "Mark." He was a little surprised. Before he could reply, Charlotte interrupted, her voice cold. "I don't think she understands how this company works. Some people just need to know their place." Maya turned back, her eyes calm. "You're right, Mrs. Kane. Everyone should know their place. I'm in the position I chose. 1A. The word silenced the entire room. Charlotte blushed and was about to say more, but Mark quickly intervened. "Okay, let me handle it." He led her back to her chair, but the look he gave Maya was different now, a little confused, a little annoyed. When everyone was quiet, Maya opened her laptop. The first thing she typed was, "A culture of service reflects an organization's true values." She paused, then deleted it. She knew this wasn't the time to write. Right now. The important thing was to observe and see where AeroVista, her baby, would fly next. Outside, the Los Angeles sun shone on the wings of the plane. The nearly 2-mile runway came into view. Maya took a deep breath and leaned her head back in her seat. A normal morning at LAX, but she knew that in a few hours. This flight would be anything but normal. Charlotte Kane was born and raised in a political family in Boston. Her father was a prominent senator, and her mother was the president of a large charity that funded social programs. On the surface, Charlotte had it all: beauty, money, status, and extensive connections. But deep inside, she always lived with the feeling that she had to be prioritized, that she needed attention, that the whole world was there to serve her. That feeling grew over the years, becoming so ingrained that she no longer recognized her own arrogance. Charlotte was known in high society as a picky perfectionist. She liked everything to be her way, from the exact 5-ounce pour of wine to the window seat in row 1A. To her, not being seated in her usual seat was an insult. "I don't like being behind anyone." She once said at a party, "People call it confidence. I call it standard." The audience laughed politely, and she raised her glass, proud of what she thought was dignity. That morning, Charlotte was a little frustrated when she entered the VIP lounge at LAX. Her personal assistant announced that the flight was delayed 5 minutes due to the weather in New York, and she frowned, complaining that the airline has never respected the time of a valuable person. Mark Reynolds, the flight attendant, happened to be in the lounge. He bowed and said in his familiar voice, "Mrs. Kane, it's a pleasure to serve you again. We have prepared seat 1A as usual." She smiled slightly. "Good. Mark, I like stability." But when she boarded the plane, she saw a black woman in a gray coat sitting in her exact seat. She paused for a second, her eyes narrowing. "That's my seat," she said quietly, but enough for Mark to hear. "I'll take care of it," he said quickly. The way he said it pleased her. Charlotte was used to people being quick to please her like that. She turned to the man next to her, a young businessman, and spoke in a soft but self-satisfied voice. "I can't stand it when things are out of place. There's an order to the world. You know everyone should be in their place." The man nodded, smiling politely, and she calmly continued the call. Her voice was even and clear, emphasizing each word as if she were at a press conference. "Yes, I'm going to Manhattan this afternoon. The meeting with the charity board must be carefully planned. I don't want anything to go wrong." Mark approached and whispered to Maya Ellis, but Charlotte heard enough to understand that the woman refused to give up her seat. She raised her eyebrows slightly, her tone sarcastic. "Some people are so stubborn. I guess she doesn't understand the meaning of respect." She turned to Mark, her voice sharper. "You know who I am. Mark, I don't want to make a scene, but I can't sit in the wrong place." In Charlotte's eyes, this was nothing more than a small social test. She was used to seeing others bow to her status. From restaurant staff to hotel maids, everyone was willing to give way when she approached. So when Maya, a black woman who was not dressed elegantly, dared to refuse, she felt insulted. In her mind, this was not just a matter of seating, but a challenge to her status. As the plane began to taxi, Charlotte was still angry. She sat in row 2A, leaned over to Mark, who was standing nearby, and said quietly but meaningfully, "You know, Mark, this airline is going downhill. They've forgotten how to serve people who bring real value." Mark bowed his head and replied, "I understand. Ma'am, I'll report back." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. I don't want AeroVista to lose its reputation because of one inconsiderate passenger." That made Mark even more nervous. He didn't exactly agree with Charlotte, but he knew she had a lot of influence. A complaint from her could cost him his job. He'd heard she was close to several people on the AeroVista board, especially Philip Grant. Philip had once mentioned Ms. Kane's valuable input in a staff meeting. Mark knew what that meant: keep Ms. Kane happy at all costs. Charlotte took the glass of wine Mark brought over, took a small sip, and said, "At least you remember I like Pinot Noir, not Chardonnay like you newbies." Mark smiled wryly. "Of course, ma'am." She turned to Maya, who was still sitting in seat 1A, her laptop open and typing away. The sight annoyed Charlotte. "She seems confident," she said to the person sitting next to her. "Overconfidence can be rude." The other person smiled, not daring to respond. She continued, "It's sad that everyone thinks they deserve a front row seat these days." Maya's words rang loud and clear in her head, but she remained silent. She was used to people like Charlotte. They spoke with authority, but underneath was fear of losing their place, of no longer being seen as special. Maya understood. She had met hundreds of people like Charlotte in her career, not necessarily bad, just lost in a world where worth was measured by status. The flight continued to stabilize at 35,000 feet. Mark went to check the VIP list, glanced at Maya, and made a note. Charlotte reclined her seat, put on her headphones, closed her eyes, and relaxed her face like someone who had just won justice. She had no idea that, just a few hours later, that feeling of victory would turn into an unprecedented humiliation. When breakfast was served, Charlotte asked for a change, saying she was allergic to eggs. Mark immediately changed it for her, even though there was no note on the special request list. When another passenger asked for a glass of water, Mark simply said, "Please wait until after the VIP guests." Maya watched the scene, her heart heavy. She wrote in her notebook, "The obvious favoritism. The preferential policy is killing mutual respect." Charlotte saw Maya writing and asked half-jokingly, "Are you writing a complaint letter or a diary?" Maya looked up and smiled. "I'm just writing down what I see, ma'am." Charlotte sneered, "I hope you spelled it correctly." Little did she know, her gentle reply contained a warning. For the rest of the flight, Charlotte kept calling Mark, sometimes to ask for more wine, sometimes to adjust the cabin temperature. She liked the feeling of being served, liked to see others bowing to her. Mark, though tired, still tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor. He didn't dare disobey her, especially when he knew she could affect his future. Maya sat still, occasionally looking out the window. Below was a sea of white clouds, the sun shining in patches of orange. In the stillness of the sky, she thought about what was happening on the ground, where people still discriminated, still put themselves above others just because of status. She suddenly remembered what her father had said years ago. "When you forget that all men are equal, you will fall before you know you have no wings." Charlotte laughed loudly at a joke on the phone, the sound echoing throughout the cabin. Mark turned and looked at her proudly, and Maya smiled slightly. A thought formed in her mind, clear as light through clouds. She knew she couldn't keep silent forever. And as the plane began to descend, as the air in the cabin grew heavy, something in Maya changed. She closed her laptop and looked out at the blue sky ahead, her eyes shining. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but she was ready. The cabin speaker blared, signaling that the plane was approaching cruising altitude. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, and the first-class cabin was filled with soft chatter. Mark Reynolds walked down the aisle, checking each row of seats, his face professional, but his eyes showing a hint of tension. He was thinking about the request Charlotte Kane had just made again, to switch seats with the woman in seat 1A. Maya Ellis looked out the window, her eyes as still as a lake. Outside, the sky was endless, the clouds white as soft silk. She sipped her water, her heart calm, but deep inside, a wave was simmering. She knew this would come. She had seen dozens of stories like this, people who believed they deserved more than others because of their status, and others who stayed silent, giving way just to avoid trouble. But today, she was no longer an observer. Today, she was the test. Mark stopped in front of seat 1A and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." Maya turned back, her gaze calm. "Yes." He spoke softly, his voice softer than before, but still showing his hesitation. "Mrs. Charlotte Kane still wants to sit in this seat. She thinks you'll be more comfortable in 3C, since that's also first class. I hope you understand. We just want everyone to be happy." Maya looked at him for a few seconds, saying nothing. The air around her seemed to freeze. Nearby passengers began to notice, a few turning to look at her, waiting to see how she would react. She smiled slightly, setting her glass down on the table. "Mr. Reynolds," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "I understand your job is not easy, but I paid for this seat. I have the right to stay." Mark nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I know, but she is a very special customer for the airline. She flies with us often. I am just following the rules." Maya tilted her head, her gaze never leaving his. "What rule allows one to take someone's seat to please another? If you can find it, I'll gladly stand up." Her voice was soft but clear. Each word reverberated in the small space like the sound of metal hitting metal. Mark was embarrassed, glancing at Charlotte. She was sitting in row 2A, arms crossed, lips pressed tightly together, eyes cold as knives. Mark sighed softly, leaned down and said in a lower voice, "I'm really sorry, Miss Ellis, but if you don't cooperate, I'll have to report this to the captain." Maya looked at him, smiling a little smile that only someone who had suffered so much injustice could give. "Do what you think is right." Mark walked away, his heart heavy. He didn't want to do this, but his career depended on guests like Charlotte Kane. He knew how much influence she had. A complaint from her could get him reprimanded, even fired. He'd seen a colleague fired for being underrated by a VIP guest. In his head, the voice of the area manager echoed with elite diamond guests. Absolute priority, and absolute meant no other choice. He went straight to the cockpit, quickly telling the captain about a minor situation that required assistance. A few minutes later, a safety officer walked in, his face stern. "Hello?" the man said. "I was told there was a slight mistake regarding seating. I hope Ms. Ellis can cooperate so that the flight can run smoothly." Maya didn't respond right away. She looked at the flight attendant, then around the cabin. Everyone was quiet. No one was speaking, but there was anticipation in their eyes, half curiosity, half fear. She took a deep breath, then said slowly, "I'm not causing trouble. I'm not yelling. I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for. If this is how AeroVista treats its passengers, I think they should probably review their policies." Mark stood behind him, his heart clenched. The words "the company should review its policies" made him tremble. Something in Maya's voice made him feel ashamed. Charlotte, from the back seat, interjected, "Oh my God, she's overreacting. Mark, are you going to turn this flight into a stage show?" Maya turned, her eyes meeting Charlotte's. "No one wants a stage. Mrs. Kane. But perhaps sometimes people need light to see what's going on. The sentence caused the first-class cabin to fall into absolute silence. Charlotte blushed, gritted her teeth, and whispered, "How rude!" Maya didn't reply. She sat back, buckled her seatbelt, and opened her laptop. She didn't type anything, just stared at the dark screen, as if she saw herself reflected in it, a tired woman who never gave up. Mark stepped back, not knowing what to say. His throat felt dry. Finally, he could only whisper, "I will report to the superiors." Then he turned away. The voice in his headset began to give orders. "Continue the journey. Do not interrupt the flight." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the engine hum. "Stay calm." "Maya," she told herself. Memories flooded back. She remembered her early days as a startup, being turned down for loans because she was a black woman. She remembered the look on investors' faces when they said, "You should find a white CEO if you want people to believe in you." She had been through it all, but she had not let her hatred guide her. Today, she would not let her anger guide her. After a few minutes, Mark returned, his voice firmer. "Miss Ellis, if you don't change seats, I'll be forced to make a note of this in the report. The company will look into it." She looked at him, her voice soft but clear. "You do your job, and I will do mine." The atmosphere became heavy. A man in row 3B turned around and whispered, "She's right. It's her seat. Everyone has the right to be treated fairly." Another woman nodded. "That's right. Why force someone to give up their seat?" Mark was momentarily confused. For the first time in his career, he felt that people were not on his side. Charlotte glared at the passengers and said, "I will report this. AeroVista will not tolerate this kind of rebellious behavior again." Maya smiled slightly. "I hope AeroVista won't let this kind of discriminatory behavior happen again." Her voice was soft but penetrating, like a stream of cold water cutting through the thick air. Charlotte fell silent, turning away, her face still red. Mark bowed his head, avoiding Maya's eyes, then retreated to the back of the cabin. When it all calmed down, Maya leaned her head back and took a deep breath. Outside, the sun was shining through the clouds, its light reflecting off the glass, illuminating the cabin. She didn't know which of them knew who she was, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she didn't keep quiet. A moment later, Ethan Lopez walked by, his eyes uncertain. He whispered as he leaned closer to Maya, "I'm sorry about this, ma'am. I know you're right." Maya looked at him, a small smile forming on her face. "Thank you. Ethan, do what you believe is right, even if others don't dare." He nodded, his eyes brightening. He didn't know why, but this woman made him want to be better. The flight continued uneventfully, at least on the surface. But inside, something was changing not just in Maya's mind, but in Mark's heart as well. He felt like he'd crossed a line between submission and recognizing what true justice was. As for Maya, she knew this little incident would not end here. When the plane landed, there would be a report, a meeting, possibly a fake apology from management. But this time, she would not just observe, she would act. She closed her eyes and smiled. They just failed their first test. She thought, and she knew the real journey of this flight had only just begun. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin of Flight AV231 was different after the incident. Although everyone tried to return to the usual quiet of a luxury airline, there was a thin layer of tension that permeated every look and gesture. Charlotte Kane sat still, arms crossed over her chest, lips pressed together. Her face was tense, her eyes cold as ice. occasionally glancing at Maya Ellis, who was quietly reading a document on her laptop. She felt insulted, challenged, and that made her blood boil even more. Mark Reynolds stood near the service compartment, holding the inventory board, but his eyes never left the row of seats in front of him. He was blaming himself. He knew Maya was right. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't making a scene. She was just standing up for her legal rights. But he also knew Charlotte Kane wasn't one to let things slide if she felt slighted. She could have called Philip Grant, the chairman of the board, and with a few words, he could have been suspended. He tried to stay calm, but now he was torn. On one side was his professional ethics. On the other was his fear of losing his job. Ethan Lopez stepped out of the economy class and handed Mark a drink order. As he passed Maya, he stopped and bowed slightly. "Do you need anything else?" She looked up, her gaze gentle. "No, thank you, Ethan." He nodded and continued walking, but he felt a pang of unease. He had worked for the airline for 2 years and had always believed AeroVista to be a fair place, but the scene just now made him lose faith. For the first time, he saw clearly that discrimination existed not only in society, but also in the environment he was once proud of. A middle-aged passenger in row 3B, who had spoken up in Maya's defense earlier, leaned toward her. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Not everyone has the courage to say no like that." Maya smiled slightly. "Thank you. I just don't want to be silent anymore." He nodded. "The world needs more people like you." Charlotte overheard the conversation, her face growing colder. She pressed the call button for the flight attendant. Mark hurried over. "I'm not feeling well," she said, her voice hard. "The atmosphere here is terrible. I want to make an official report about the other passenger." Mark bowed his head, trying to speak softly. "Yes? I understand, ma'am. I'll take note of it." He pulled out his notebook and wrote a few lines, but his hand was shaking slightly. He knew that if he wrote down the incident in a way that was favorable to Charlotte, he would be betraying his conscience. But if he wrote honestly, he could lose everything. Meanwhile, Maya remained calm. She had no idea that this small incident was creating ripples throughout the flight. A young couple in business class heard the story from another flight attendant and began to gossip. The husband whispered, "I've read about discrimination like this." "But I never thought it would happen at AeroVista," the wife replied. "If that woman knew who she was, she wouldn't dare." Neither of them knew that the woman was the founder of the airline they were flying on. Mark returned to the cabin and put his notebook down on the table. He took a deep breath and looked up at his colleagues. "Do you ever feel that we're doing something wrong?" A female flight attendant named Laura looked surprised. "What's wrong?" He looked around, his voice low. "We say this airline is about people, about respect. But today we just treated a passenger like she was inferior just because she didn't have a VIP card." Laura was silent. Another male flight attendant replied softly, "You're right, Mark. But what can we do? We're just following orders. No one wants to get fired." Mark slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. "Yeah, that's the problem. Everyone is more afraid of losing their job than losing themselves." Meanwhile, Charlotte took out her phone and began writing a long text message to her best friend, Philip Grant's wife. "On flight AV231 today," she wrote, "the service was unbelievably bad. They let a regular passenger take my seat, and Mark wasn't strong enough to handle it. I think AeroVista is losing its way. Philip should know this." She sent the message, then leaned back in her seat, a faint smile on her face. Little did she know, in a few hours, The message would reach Philip along with a bunch of other data, and the first person to see it would be Maya. Meanwhile, Maya opened her laptop and began typing a few notes for her own report. Observation of flight AV231. Situation: economy class passengers asked to change seats with VIP passengers. Reaction: clear discrimination. Staff violating policies for fear of offending superiors. Service culture lost soul. She paused, looking at the last line for a long time. Lost soul. Those two words made her heart ache. She remembered what her father had said years ago. When you lose the reason why you started, you will no longer know where you are going. The plane began to shake slightly. The captain's voice rang out, deep and calm. We are flying through an area of light turbulence. Please fasten your seat belts. Maya fastened her seat belt and looked out. The dim light penetrated the gray clouds. A few drops of water lingered on the glass, leaving long streaks. The sight reminded her of the loneliness of those who had been overlooked because of their skin color or status. She was no longer angry, just sad for a world where people had forgotten basic kindness. In row 3B, the middle-aged man leaned slightly toward her. Do you know they're afraid of you? Maya smiled. I don't think they are. They just haven't learned to see each other as equals. Mark stood in front, listening, and something in his heart resonated. He knew she was right. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't hateful. She was just reminding them of something they had forgotten. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of his uniform. After an hour of flying, the flight returned to a stable state. Lunch was served. Mark went to each seat, trying to keep a smile. When he reached Maya, he hesitated a bit. Would you like to eat? She nodded. Yes, thank you. He put the tray down, then bowed his head and said softly, I apologize for earlier. Maya looked up, her eyes softening. No need to apologize. Mark, sometimes people just need a chance to do the right thing. He stood still for a moment, then said softly, Thank you for reminding me why I chose this job. She smiled. It's not too late to remember. Mark felt a little lighter at that remark. He turned away, feeling a small light switch on in his heart. Charlotte, sitting in row 220, was still frowning. She didn't understand why Mark was being so friendly with the woman. She felt annoyed, but also vaguely worried. Part of her feared that perhaps the woman was more than just a normal passenger. Inside the cockpit, the captain received a signal from AeroVista headquarters. An automated message indicating a VIP passenger report had been sent to the system. He looked at Mark and asked softly through the intercom. Is something wrong? Mark replied simply. Just a little misunderstanding. I'll report it later. He turned off the mic, feeling confused. Maya sat still, looking at the screen in front of her, displaying the flight map. The flight was over Colorado, and she had about 2 hours to reach New York. She gently touched the silver bracelet her mother had given her and whispered, I will do the right thing. Mom. The light reflected off the pendant, sparkling like a tear that had not yet fallen. The flight continued, but something had changed in the hearts of many. Ethan watched Maya silently with respect. Mark began to think about the true value of work. And Charlotte, despite her efforts to appear indifferent, felt uneasy. She didn't know why the woman's calm gaze made her unable to sit still. Outside the window, the sky was clearer. The clouds parted, giving way to a vast expanse of blue. Maya closed her eyes and smiled slightly. She knew that just one small action today could have a bigger impact than she could have imagined. An impact not just within the airline, but in the way people saw each other as real people, not as hierarchies. The engine hummed like a steady heartbeat. Soft light streamed through the first-class windows, illuminating the faces lost in their own thoughts. The initial tension had subsided, but it hadn't dissipated. It was still there, smoldering, like the warmth of embers under a thin layer of ash. Maya Ellis sat still, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. She didn't read her papers, nor take notes. She just sat quietly, listening to the wind through the fuselage and feeling the rare silence after the tense collisions. She recalled the early years of starting a business, when every penny of capital was sweat. Every decision was a gamble. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, lying staring at the ceiling and wondering, am I on the right path? However, she never felt afraid. She was only afraid of one thing, losing her original ideal. And today, sitting on her own flight, she clearly felt that fear returning. AeroVista was no longer the brainchild of kindness that she had dreamed of, but was gradually turning into a cold machine of privilege and discrimination. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the cabin, looking tired. He had flown hundreds of flights, seen all kinds of passengers polite, difficult, even rude, but never before had he felt faced with such a stark choice between right and wrong, between obedience and honesty. He looked at Maya, then at Charlotte Kane, who sat with her arms crossed, occasionally scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing forward with an annoyed look. Mark realized he couldn't continue pretending that everything was okay. Ethan Lopez walked over, put the tray of drinks on the waiter's table, and whispered, "Mark, the atmosphere is tense. The whole business class is starting to talk." Mark nodded. "I know, but don't add fuel to the fire. Just do your job." Ethan hesitated. "Do you think we're doing something wrong?" Mark was silent. After a long while, he said softly, "I think we've forgotten what we wanted when we put on this uniform." Ethan didn't reply, but his young eyes flashed with confusion. He had always believed that serving was about more than just delivering food and drinks, but about providing a sense of respect. But today, he saw that distorted by power and fear. Charlotte Kane called Mark over, her voice cold. "Have you spoken to your superiors?" Mark nodded. "I've given you a preliminary report, ma'am." Charlotte put the phone down on the table, her voice hard. "Good. I just texted Philip. He'll take care of it. I won't tolerate this disrespect. If AeroVista wants to keep its position, they need to prioritize." Mark felt his stomach tighten. He bowed slightly. "Yes, ma'am." He turned away, but Charlotte's words were like small knives, stabbing deep into his heart. Meanwhile, Maya remained silent. She knew Charlotte was looking for a way to complain, but she didn't care. The truth didn't need to be spoken aloud. She believed what she saw, and she had proof. As the sunlight slanted over her shoulder, illuminating half her face, she smiled slightly. She wasn't smiling because she had won, but because she realized that determination is sometimes the only strength a person needs in the face of injustice. A flight attendant brought a snack. Maya thanked him, then saw Mark still standing in the aisle, his eyes wandering somewhere. She called softly, "Mark." He turned around, surprised. She spoke slowly. "You look tired." He forced a smile. "Just a little. You've been doing this for a long time. You must understand that sometimes the right thing isn't easy." He was silent. "I understand," he said softly, "but not everyone has the courage to choose the right thing." Maya looked at him, her voice as light as the wind. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the act of doing something despite the fear. Mark shivered slightly at the words. He nodded, then turned away. Her words echoed in his head like a familiar refrain, simple yet powerful. About an hour later, the flight entered a quiet zone. The light outside had changed. The sun had tilted, dyeing the long layers of clouds golden. The passengers began to relax. Some spoke softly, some read, some looked out the window. But no one had forgotten what had just happened. It remained in the air like a thin trace, barely noticeable, but indelible. Charlotte turned on her phone again and wrote a few more lines. She was planning a meeting in New York, a fancy fundraising dinner where she was the guest of honor. She wanted to appear impeccable, to show no trace of her recent outburst. But inside, she couldn't shake the unease. There was something in the woman's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Not a hostile look, but a quiet strength that made her feel small, a feeling she hated more than anything else. In the back cabin, Ethan said to another flight attendant, "Do you know who the woman in 1A is?" The other shook his head. No, just a regular passenger." Ethan hesitated, then said, "I'm not sure. There's something different about her." He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt that the woman wasn't afraid, even though she was insulted in front of everyone. That feeling made him respect her, even though he didn't know why. Mark returned to first class again, this time not out of duty, but because something deep inside urged him. He stopped in front of seat 1A and whispered, "Miss Ellis, can I ask you something?" Maya looked up, her eyes calm. "Sure." He hesitated. "If you were in a situation like mine, between a powerful client and an ordinary person, what would you do?" Maya put down her pen and pondered. "I'll ask myself a question first. What am I serving, power or humanity?" Mark was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Thank you." In that moment, he understood that his job wasn't just to serve the person who paid more. His job was to treat everyone fairly. And he realized he'd been controlled by fear for too long. As for Maya, when she saw him leave, she sensed a small change in his eyes, an awakening. She knew that if just one person in the team recognized the true value, AeroVista still had hope. The captain announced that the plane would begin descending in a little over an hour. The loudspeakers blared, then stopped. Maya leaned back and closed her eyes. In that quiet moment, memories flooded back. She remembered her mother, the woman who had taught her that kindness was not weakness. She remembered being rejected, looked down upon, but still smiling. She remembered herself at 26, standing before a panel of white men, talking about her dream of starting an airline. They laughed. But today, she was flying that dream. Despite the cracks, she believed it could be mended. Charlotte asked for more wine. Mark brought it, his voice calmer than before. "Here's your wine." She glanced at him and whispered, "Remember, customers pay for priority." He smiled slightly. "I do, ma'am. But I also remember, every passenger deserves respect." Charlotte paused, her eyes wavering. She didn't reply, just turned away and finished her glass. Ethan saw this and felt a surge of pride in his heart. He whispered to Laura, "Mark just said something this airline should be telling us every day." Laura nodded. "Maybe things will be different after this flight." Maya opened her eyes slightly and looked around the cabin. No one knew, but she had just added a line to her internal report. Trust can be lost, but it can also be regained with a small act. Outside, the sunset was fading, painting the clouds a pale orange. The sky was calm. Maya placed her hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat harmonize with the steady hum of the engines. The flight was still moving, but it was no longer a journey from Los Angeles to New York. For her, it was a journey of awakening her own, her crew, and AeroVista. The afternoon light was slanting as the plane descended to medium altitude. The sky outside the window turned a fiery orange like a silken veil lit at the edge of the clouds. The light fell on Maya Ellis's face, making her eyes glow a warm gold. Everyone in the cabin seemed to have calmed down, but unspoken words hung in the air. Charlotte Kane sat still, her expression calm, but her hands clenched on the arms of her seat. Mark Reynolds, still at the front of the cabin, glanced at Maya from time to time as if searching for answers. A ding sound rang out, signaling an internal message. Mark looked at the small screen of the device in his hand. It was a notification from AeroVista headquarters Flight AV231, urgent request from Chairman Philip Grant. Check and report passenger behavior in Seat 1A. He looked at the text, his heart sinking. Although he had expected it, receiving direct orders still made him dizzy. He knew that this meant things had been pushed to a higher level. Charlotte Kane must have used her connections. He bit his lip, raised his head to look forward. Maya was still sitting there, strangely calm. He took a deep breath, then approached, his voice soft. "Miss Ellis, I apologize, but I received a request to verify your identity. Could you please show me your ticket and identification?" Maya looked up, her eyes still calm. She smiled slightly. "Of course." She opened her bag, took out her identification card, and placed it lightly on the tray table in front of her. Mark picked it up, and when his eyes stopped at the words Dr. Maya Ellis, CEO, AeroVista Airlines, he was suddenly struck by lightning. His whole body stiffened, his heart pounding. He looked at her, eyes wide, speechless. Maya kept her small smile, her gaze gentle. "Now you understand, don't you, Mark?" He nodded slightly, his voice trembling. You are—" "Yes," she interrupted, her voice low and warm. "The founder of the airline you work for?" For a few seconds, Mark stood still like a statue. Ethan, who was nearby, was also stunned. He didn't hear what was going on, but from Mark's attitude and Maya's eyes, he understood that something big had just happened. Charlotte from the back seat saw Mark stop and said angrily, "Why are you still standing there? Get over it." Mark didn't turn around. He just looked at Maya, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. Dr. Ellis, I really don't know." Maya smiled, her voice light as the wind. "I know, and that's why I decided to fly today." Mark bowed his head. His voice choked. "I treated you badly. I was just following the rules." "It's not just you." "Mark," she said, "a lot of people are following rules that were never written down, unwritten rules that society has set up to distinguish who is worthy and who is not." Ethan approached, his voice trembling slightly. "Miss, are you really the CEO of AeroVista?" Maya turned to him and nodded. "Yes." "Ethan. And I'm not flying today to check on the technology or the service. I'm flying to see the soul of AeroVista, the soul I fear we've lost." The cabin held its breath. A few passengers in the back began to whisper. Charlotte heard something and turned around. Who is she?" Mark turned, his voice low but firm. "Dr. Maya Ellis, CEO and founder of AeroVista Airlines." Charlotte froze, her face pale for a moment. She sneered, trying to regain her composure. "A joke. No way." Maya turned slowly to look at her, her smile unchanged. "I wish this was a joke. Mrs. Kane?" The whole room was silent. Charlotte felt her throat dry. She stammered, I don't know. If I knew. If you knew. You wouldn't have behaved like that, Maya said softly. But that's the point. True respect doesn't depend on someone's identity. Ma'am, it's there even when you don't know who they are. Maya's voice was low, but it echoed loudly in the quiet first-class cabin. A few passengers looked at each other, their eyes filled with surprise and admiration. Mark felt a lump in his throat. He saw clearly the difference between power and dignity. Maya stood up slightly, her voice low but full of weight. When I founded AeroVista, I said that this airline would not just be about moving people from one place to another. I wanted it to be about bringing people closer together. But we seem to have forgotten that. When service becomes a slave to power, this airline no longer flies on wings of faith, but on wings of fear. She paused, took a deep breath, and looked around the cabin. Today, I am not just a passenger. I am a listener and an observer. And I see that we need to change, starting right here. Mark bowed his head, his eyes red. I'm sorry. Dr. Ellis, I don't deserve this uniform. Maya placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You deserve it. Mark, if you've learned from your mistakes today, we can all get lost. But if we stop, we can always find our way back. Ethan looked at that scene and felt pride rising in his heart. He thought to himself, he had never seen anyone so strong yet so gentle. Charlotte sat still, her hands clenched, her lips trembling slightly. She felt small, even ashamed. All her life she had prided herself on maintaining dignity. But now she understood that what she was maintaining was not dignity, but the shadow of status. She bowed her head, her voice hoarse. I'm sorry. Dr. Ellis. Maya turned back, her eyes kind. I don't need your apologies, ma'am. I just want you to remember that sometimes all it takes is a fair look to make you feel worthy. No one said anything more. The steady hum of the engines played again, a melody that served as a backdrop to the strange moment. Mark returned quietly to his seat, feeling lighter but also weighed down by thoughts. He knew this flight would change everything for him, for AeroVista, and perhaps for the airline industry. Maya sat back in seat 1A, opened her laptop, and typed the last few lines of the report she had started that morning. Today, I saw what I feared AeroVista is losing its soul. But I also saw hope in Ethan's eyes, in Mark's transformation, in the awakening of a passenger who once believed privilege was a given. And I know there are still wings that want to fly with kindness. As she saved the document, the late afternoon sunlight shone on the screen, blurring the text. She closed her eyes, letting the light wash over her face. Feeling strangely at peace, the plane began to descend, and the captain's voice rang out warmly. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching New York. Please fasten your seat belts. Ethan walked past and whispered, Thank you. Dr. Ellis. Maya looked at him and smiled slightly. Thank you for not turning away. He nodded slightly and walked away, filled with new motivation. Charlotte sat silently, looking out. She saw the small buildings looming below her, and for the first time in years she felt a strange sensation, humbled. Maya leaned her head back in her seat and whispered, There are flights that don't take people to new places, but bring them back to themselves. The captain's voice rang out over the intercom, deep but a little emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. A soft ding sounded, and the entire first-class cabin seemed to fall into silence at the same time. The atmosphere was strange, no longer the intense tension as before, but a thoughtful silence. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something unusual. A truth revealed in the clouds made everyone realize how small they were. Maya Ellis adjusted her seat and pulled her seatbelt over her shoulders. The afternoon light from outside slanted in, bathing half her face in a soft orange. Everything seemed to slow down. She could hear the wind whistling outside the fuselage, the change in pitch of the engines as the pilots descended, the flaps opening in preparation for landing. But inside, she felt strangely peaceful. Mark Reynolds stood at the front, silently scanning the cabin. He still couldn't quite believe that the calm woman was the founder of the airline he was flying for. Today's flight had changed him, not because he feared retribution, but because he understood that sometimes a moment of humiliation could be the beginning of enlightenment. He no longer wanted to be someone who bowed to authority. He wanted to be someone who bowed out of respect. Ethan Lopez sat in the passenger seat near the service area, still looking out at the 1A passenger with a silent gaze. Maya's image kept appearing in his mind like a symbol. A woman who was both strong and calm, tolerant enough not to break others, but tough enough to make them change. He thought about his own small dreams, the dream of becoming a chief flight attendant, or even higher, and realized that perhaps what would get him far was not being loved by his superiors, but keeping a kind heart amidst invisible rules. Charlotte Kane sat still, speechless. Since learning Maya's true identity, she had not dared to look at the woman again. All her pride, all her confidence, which had been a mask, now crumbled in silence. She was not angry at Maya, but at herself. In the moment of realization, she felt more ashamed than ever. In her mind, one question kept repeating: if that person wasn't the CEO, would I regret it? She knew the answer, and that was what made her choke up. The captain announced one last time, his voice low but gentle, "Prepare for landing." Maya opened her eyes and looked out the window. She saw the sparkling lights of New York below, the winding streets, the buildings shining like stars on earth. She smiled slightly. New York was still the same, proud, flashy and noisy, but also the starting point of many dreams and bitter lessons. The plane's wheels touched the runway, making a long screeching sound, then slowed down, before stopping completely. The cabin shook slightly, and a few passengers breathed a sigh of relief. The captain spoke. "Welcome to New York. Thank you for flying with AeroVista Airlines. We look forward to serving you on future flights." That sentence, seemingly ordinary, today carried a different weight, because the flight attendants were being reminded that service is not just a job, but also how people treat each other in life. When the plane came to a stop, the lights went off, and passengers began to unbuckle their seatbelts. There was a soft chatter, a clanking of objects, but everything was softer than usual. Mark approached Maya, his voice sincere. "Miss Ellis, thank you for giving me the chance to look at myself. I promise not to let what happened today happen again." Maya looked at him, her eyes gentle. "I believe in you. Mark, remember, sometimes it only takes one person standing up at the right time to change the whole system." Ethan stood nearby and said softly, "Miss Ellis, I have never seen anyone handle a situation like you. Calm, firm, but still making others realize their mistakes." Maya smiled. "Thank you. Ethan, this world doesn't need more people who criticize loudly. It needs more people who dare to speak the truth, but with kindness." Those words made Ethan bow his head, an indescribable feeling of gratitude welling up in his heart. Charlotte stood slowly. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward Maya. The other passengers glanced at her, holding their breaths. Her voice was low and trembling slightly. "Dr. Ellis, I want to apologize. Not because you're the CEO, but because I've forgotten how to behave as a human being." Maya looked at her eyes non-judgmental. "Thank you, Charlotte. It's never easy to admit mistakes, and I appreciate that. Let today be a beginning, not a wound." Charlotte nodded, her eyes slightly moist. "I understand, and I will remember." A few passengers nearby clapped their hands lightly, not loudly, just small but sincere applause. Mark bowed his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Ethan felt his throat tighten. At that moment, although no one spoke, everyone knew they had just witnessed something important, something that rarely happened on flights that seemed indifferent in the sky. As the passengers began to disembark, Maya remained seated, watching everyone pass by. She nodded to each person, her eyes friendly. Mark walked over and bowed deeply to her. "Have a good evening, Dr. Ellis," she replied. "You too, Mark, and continue to fly with integrity." He nodded. "I will." When she was alone in the cabin, Maya closed her eyes for a few seconds, inhaling deeply. She felt her breath mix with the scent of metal and leather in the enclosed space. Then opened her eyes slightly and took out her phone. The screen lit up, displaying a series of messages from the board. She glanced at it, smiled, selected one, and replied, "No need for an emergency meeting. I've seen enough. Please send my thanks to the AV231 crew, especially Mark Reynolds and Ethan Lopez. We're going to need a refresher not on procedures, but on humanity." She pressed send and put her phone back in her pocket. Outside, it was dark. The airport lights reflected off the plane, illuminating it like a giant silver strip against the black sky. Maya stood, grabbed her coat, and walked to the door. She turned back to look at first class one last time. There, where once had been a stage of distinction and arrogance, there was only a sense of peace, as if every soul had been gently washed away. As she stepped down the stairs, Maya felt the New York breeze on her face, cool and heavy with the smell of city smoke. She looked up at the starry sky above. In that moment, she thought of her parents, of her challenging past, and of the road ahead. She knew there was still much work to be done, many prejudices to be erased, many hearts to be touched. But she also knew that if one small flight could change the perceptions of a few people, then thousands of more flights could change the world. A ground staff member approached and bowed. "Welcome back to New York, Dr. Ellis," she replied with a smile. "Thank you. I'm home." And as she walked, the gentle wind blew across the concrete floor, carrying the echoes of a flight that carried not only people, but also lessons in respect, humility, and the power of human dignity. After leaving the airport, Maya Ellis was picked up by a company car and taken to AeroVista headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. The city was still brightly lit at night, but what she felt was not the bustle, but a strange quietness. She sat in the back seat, her eyes looking out the window. The tall buildings passed by like moving columns of light, reflected on the car's glass in a streak of color. She leaned her head back, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. It had all been just a few hours of flight, but it felt like a lifetime. When the car stopped in front of the headquarters building, she looked up at the brightly lit sign that read AeroVista Airlines, the sky with integrity. The sky of integrity. She chuckled. It was a beautiful slogan, but a hint of bitterness rose in her heart. Integrity. Those two words seemed to have been forgotten somewhere in the corridors of power and profit. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The cold night wind, the salty scent of the sea mixed with the smell of urban smog, made her feel more awake. Inside, a group of senior staff were already waiting. As soon as she entered, they all stood up. Their eyes were both surprised and worried. The first one to speak was James Porter, the regional operations director. He walked over, his voice trembling slightly. "Dr. Ellis, we just received a report about Flight AV231. Is there really an incident with the VIP passengers?" Maya took off her coat and put it on the chair, her gaze calm. "The incident is not with the VIP passengers, James. It is with the way we forget that our customers are human beings." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at each other. She slowly sat down, poured a glass of water, and continued, "I flew today not as a CEO, but as a passenger. And what I saw, it broke my heart. We have become alienated from our original vision." James sighed and sat down. "I knew there were problems within the team, but I didn't think they were this serious. We've always emphasized premium service for our priority customers," Maya interrupted, her voice soft but forceful. "And that's what we've lost. When premium service means putting others down, we've failed. I don't need my airline to only serve diamond card holders. I need my airline to treat you with respect." Another employee, Linda Harris, the communications director, spoke up. "This story will spread. Ma'am, some passengers have recorded the conversation in first class. I'm afraid the media will dig it up." Maya sipped her drink and replied calmly, "Let them talk. Sometimes a real story doesn't need to be hidden. It needs to be heard." She stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, the New York sky was a hazy blur, dotted with planes gliding by. AeroVista wasn't created just to sell tickets. It was created to remind people that different people can fly together equally, without bowing down. But today, I saw people bowing down because of their skin color and because of prejudice. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. Maya turned, her voice low. "I want an internal investigation, starting with the crew of AV231, not to find scapegoats, but to understand what we've lost." James nodded, but his eyes showed concern. "That would be a huge blow to your reputation, ma'am." Maya looked at him, her eyes steady. Reputation is not protected by silence. It is rebuilt by doing the right thing. When the meeting ended, she was alone in her office. The yellow light cast a shadow on a wall covered with historic AeroVista photos. One was a black and white photo of her on the day the company was launched, 10 years earlier. She was younger then, her eyes shining with confidence. She touched the frame and whispered, "We've flown far, but maybe in the wrong direction." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark Reynolds. "Dr. Ellis, I just wanted to say thank you for not accusing me. I know I was wrong, but I will prove that I can change." Maya read the text, smiling. She texted back, "Mark, don't prove it to me. Prove it to yourself and the passengers you serve. They are the reason we exist." A few minutes later, another message came in, this time from Ethan Lopez. "I told my colleagues about today's flight. They said they want to learn how you keep your composure. I've never been so proud of my profession." Maya put the phone down on the table, her eyes watering slightly. She wasn't crying, but something was rising in her throat. One flight, just one flight, could have stirred something in the hearts of people who seemed to be just doing their jobs. She looked out the window, the city below still shining like a beacon. Thousands of people were living, dreaming, struggling with fear and hope. And she understood that her job was not just to run an airline, but to create a symbol of faith. She turned on her computer and pulled up the report she had taken notes on during the flight. She added a final line. AeroVista needs to get back to its roots, not just an airline of the skies, but an airline of the people. She saved the files as the human altitude report. Outside, the sound of car horns mingled with the night wind. Maya closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat. Her mind flashed with images of her parents in Alabama. Where she grew up, people who had taught her that justice was not something to be given, but something to be held, even when no one was looking. That night, she stayed in the office until late. The room was lit up, like a small beacon in the vast city. And in that light, a decision was formed, a plan not just to right the wrongs, but to revive the AeroVista spirit from within. She said to herself, tomorrow, the sky will be different. The next morning, the sky over New York was unusually clear. The early morning sunlight streamed through the 40th floor windows of the AeroVista building, reflecting off the polished floor. The atmosphere in the executive office was quieter than usual, except for the sound of flipping through documents and clicking on keyboards. Everyone knew that today was an extraordinary meeting called by Dr. Maya Ellis herself. They didn't know exactly what would happen, but their instincts told them that this would be no ordinary meeting. Maya walked into the conference room in a dark blue suit, her gait calm, each step calculated. James Porter, Linda Harris, and several other key leaders were already present at the table. Everyone stood up to greet her, their eyes filled with respect and tension. Maya nodded slightly. Thank you, everyone. Today, we are not discussing profits, flight routes, or marketing strategies. We are discussing people. The room froze for a few seconds. She looked around, then continued. Last night, I completed the report on Flight AV231. I observed not only the behavior of the passengers, but also how our employees responded. And I realized one thing AeroVista failed. Not me, but the very principles on which the airline was founded. Linda spoke up, her voice cautious. Dr. Ellis, I understand what you mean, but this could be an isolated incident. We have thousands of flights with good service. Maya turned back, her eyes deep and calm. No, Linda, when a wrongdoing is silently accepted, it is no longer an incident. It is a culture. There was a moment of silence. No one dared to interrupt. Maya turned on the slideshow, which showed a still image from the first-class security camera. Although the image quality was unclear, everyone could see Mark Reynolds talking to Maya, then bowing his head in embarrassment, and Charlotte Kane, pointing angrily. The room fell silent. James Porter sighed. I didn't know there was a camera recording that. Maya nodded. We installed the camera for safety, but today it recorded something else, how people treat each other. She clicked the slide, and the image was replaced with the words, respect should never depend on status. She looked straight at James, her voice low but firm. I will not fire Mark Reynolds, nor will I take any disciplinary action. But I am demanding a radical change. We will institute a new training program called the Human Altitude Program. Every employee, from flight attendants to senior management, will participate, not to learn how to serve VIPs, but to learn how to serve with respect and empathy. Linda was a little worried. Dr. Ellis, that program will cost a lot of time and money, and if the media finds out, they will exploit the matter, which may damage the company's image. Maya smiled slightly. I'm not afraid of them finding out. Actually, I want them to know. No company is perfect, But there are companies that dare to correct mistakes. That's what makes AeroVista different. She paused, then looked straight at everyone, her voice slow and warm. I am not here today to defend my CEO image. I am here because I believe everyone can become better. Even if we have been wrong, that does not mean we cannot fly back on track. The room was silent. James looked at her, his face softening. I've never seen anyone say those things in front of a council. You know, Maya, you just made me feel ashamed. And I think that's a good thing. Maya chuckled. If we can feel ashamed, it means we still have a conscience. Just then, Linda's phone rang. She looked at the screen, her face pale. Dr. Ellis, the media has heard about the incident. A video from Flight AV231 is being shared on social media. It's going viral, Maya said calmly. Play it. Linda hesitated, then pressed play. On the screen, the video showed Maya being asked to change seats. Charlotte's voice was harsh, and then Maya calmly said, Respect doesn't depend on who sits where. The video ended with Mark bowing his head, saying sorry. There was nothing dramatic, but it was the quietness in each word that made it so powerful. James exclaimed, Oh my God, they're calling you the calm CEO. Linda checked the update. Millions of views. Dr. Ellis, your quote is being quoted everywhere. Maya was silent for a long moment, then said softly, It's not me that makes it contagious. It's the way people yearn to see kindness again that makes it contagious. She turned to the media team. Linda, please release a press release. No denial, no evasion. Tell the truth. Tell the truth that the CEO of AeroVista experienced discrimination on his own flight, and that the company is starting to change. Linda rolled her eyes. Are you sure this is a risky approach? Maya looked straight at her. I'm sure. The truth may hurt us once, but lies will kill us forever. The words woke everyone up. A young employee sitting at the end of the table whispered, I've never seen a leader talk like that. James turned to him. That's why she's the founder, and we're the followers. Maya smiled, not smugly, but humbly. No, James, I'm just the one who started. But you guys will decide how far AeroVista will fly. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. When it ended, everyone left with the feeling that they had witnessed something more than a crisis, a rebirth. Maya was left alone, looking out the large windows. In the distance, AeroVista planes trailed across the clear blue sky, leaving thin trails of smoke like letters in the air. She slowly sat down, opened her laptop, and wrote an email to Mark Reynolds and Ethan Lopez. Mark, Ethan, thank you both for teaching me the valuable lesson that courage is not about not making mistakes, but about getting back up after mistakes. I will need you to support the Human Altitude Program. Please help me pass on to the crew what we learned from AV231. Sincerely, Maya. She pressed send, then leaned back in her chair. In the morning sunlight, her face was tired, but also full of confidence. Somewhere, she knew that people who were once confused and afraid had now found themselves again. When the secretary came in and asked, Dr. Ellis, would you like me to prepare a press conference? Maya smiled. Yes, but no speech is needed. I just want to say one thing: we made a mistake, and we are fixing it the best way, with honesty. The secretary nodded, then said softly, You know, Dr. Ellis, everyone in the building is saying that you just made them proud. Maya looked at the young girl and replied softly, If they feel proud, let that pride translate into action. The sky outside was wide open, strangely blue, Maya said softly, as if talking to herself. In the end, to fly high, one must learn to bow before humanity. 2 weeks after the incident on Flight AV231, AeroVista was all over the news and social media. But unlike the usual media crisis, this story became a symbol of change. The press praised Dr. Maya Ellis for confronting her own company's mistakes with honesty and composure. Headlines like "The Calm CEO Who Grounded an Airline to Make It Fly Again" appeared in major newspapers. Passenger bookings skyrocketed, not because of price or promotions, but because of trust. They said they wanted to fly with an airline with heart. In her office, Maya stood by the window, looking out onto the Manhattan streets. Traffic was still heavy, but her heart no longer felt as heavy as before. Everything seemed to be going right. She had just signed off on the human altitude budget, and the first training groups were already underway. From headquarters to the crew training centers, the new spirit was spreading. Mark Reynolds was one of the first to attend the training session. He stood at the front of the class, looking down at the dozens of other flight attendants listening. His voice was low but firm. "I used to believe that my job was to please the customer who paid the most. But today I understand that my real job is to make everyone on the flight feel like they were treated fairly. When I forgot that, I hurt someone and almost lost my self-esteem." He paused, his eyes on the young faces watching him. "We can fly higher if we don't let fear control our wings." When the class ended, Ethan Lopez walked over and put his hand on his shoulder. "You said it well. I think Dr. Ellis would be proud." Mark chuckled. "I don't know if she would be proud, but at least I'm proud that I dared to change. In another city." Charlotte Kane sat in her large apartment. The sunlight filtered through the thin white curtains, illuminating her phone, which was already open to the news. She slowly read each line about Maya, about the flight, about the quote, "Respect does not depend on status." She put her hand on her chest, the feeling of regret and shame still there. But for the first time, she felt lighter. She texted Maya, "Just one line I saw the new training program. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to understand." Maya received the message during a meeting. She finished reading it and just smiled slightly. There are apologies that do not need tears, just change. That day, Maya participated in a live interview with national television. The host asked, "Dr. Ellis, what made you choose to go public with the incident instead of hiding it?" Maya sat up straight, her voice soft but clear. "Because I believe that silence in the face of error is complicity. And I believe that when you dare to admit your mistakes, you are not weakened, you are stronger." The host continued, "What do you think is the biggest lesson AeroVista learned?" Maya smiled, that no flight is truly safe if its soul is left behind. The interview aired live, and over the next 24 hours, millions of comments poured in. Some said they cried while listening to her. Others shared that they had been victims of discrimination, but felt empowered. The hashtag #FlyWithIntegrity went viral. A black college student in Texas wrote, "I have never seen someone who looks like me so respected on television. Thank you, Dr. Ellis, for making me believe I can be a CEO." That evening, Maya received a call from her father. His voice was still hoarse as ever. "Daughter, I watched the show. I am proud of you. You did the right thing. The sky doesn't need more planes. It needs more people who can fly with their hearts." She smiled, tears falling without her knowing. "I remember what you told me. I know. And I believe your mother is smiling up there too." In the following days, Maya went to many training centers, meeting with groups of employees. She did not stand on the podium, but sat with them, listening to their stories of the profession. One young flight attendant said that she had cried because a customer had insulted her, but did not dare to react for fear of losing her job. Maya held her hand and said softly, "Your true strength is not in your endurance, but in knowing that you deserve respect. And I promise, AeroVista will protect that." An older technician said that before. He always thought his job was just to tighten screws, change oil, check engines. But after this program, he understood that he was not just maintaining planes, but keeping the souls who believed in AeroVista safe. Maya listened, nodded. "You got it right. Everyone here, no matter what position, contributes to defining trust." As Maya left the center, she walked out onto the airport and saw an AeroVista plane taking off. The new slogan was clearly painted on the fuselage, "AeroVista, where dignity takes flight." She closed her eyes, feeling proud. It wasn't just a saying, it was a promise. That afternoon, she received a handwritten letter on her desk. The envelope was written in Mark Reynolds' familiar handwriting. She opened it and read slowly, "Dear Dr. Ellis, I have attended the entire first training course of the human altitude. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I have found my faith again. I used to think I was just a small employee in a huge system, but you made me realize that no one is small when they live up to their values. Thank you for giving me and AeroVista a chance to start over. Sincerely, Mark Reynolds." She folded the letter and set it beside her mother's framed photo on the table. "Mom, I think we're on the right track." As night fell, Maya sat in her office. The city lights outside were shimmering, reflecting off the glass. She didn't feel tired, just at peace. She thought about the thousands of people who worked for AeroVista, about the passengers preparing to board their next flight, about the smiles they would bring to each other. She knew the fight against prejudice and injustice was far from over, but she also knew that if just one person dared to start with kindness, the world would gradually change. And she believed AeroVista had started again with just that. 6 months after flight AV-231. AeroVista Airlines had changed beyond recognition. In the headquarters compound, large posters hung in the hallways, reading "Fly with Integrity." Employees smiled more, and the way they greeted each other changed. Gone were the cold, "Sorry, I'm busy, but are you okay? Can I help you?" Everything seemed softer, more human, more real. That morning, Maya Ellis had an internal meeting to summarize the first half of the human altitude program. She walked into the meeting room, her face radiant, but still exuding her characteristic calmness. The meeting room was more crowded than usual today because there were representatives from all departments, not just leaders. On the big screen was a chart showing the Customer Satisfaction Index. The number had increased by 37% compared to the same period last year. Maya looked around, her voice warm and soft. "I don't see a number. I see smiles, and we should be proud of that." The applause was quiet, but emotional. Mark Reynolds sat in the back row, his eyes looking at her with deep respect and gratitude. After the training, Mark was promoted to head of the International Customer Service Training Team. He had told Maya that his work had never felt more meaningful than it did now. When the meeting took a break, Ethan Lopez walked over and handed her the documents, his voice filled with excitement. "Dr. Ellis, our team just completed our first training session for new flight crews. They say the greatest lesson is not skill, but kindness." Maya smiled. "Good job. Ethan, keep up the good work. Let every AeroVista flight be a beautiful story." In the afternoon, Maya had a private meeting with Linda Harris to discuss the new media campaign. Linda presented the idea of organizing a series of short videos telling the real stories of employees after participating in the human altitude. I want viewers to feel that behind each uniform is a person, with a story, with fears, with beliefs, Linda said, her eyes sparkling. Maya nodded. I like that idea. Let's do it sincerely. No script, no embellishment. Sometimes, the simple truth moves people more than flowery words. Late in the afternoon, Maya received an email from a university in California inviting her to speak to students on the topic, Leading with Compassion. She read the email, thought for a moment, and then replied simply, I will come because the young generation is the next sky. That evening, she flew to Los Angeles. As the plane passed through the clouds, Maya looked out the window. The sky was tinged with twilight, the red sun low in the sky, reflecting on the wings of the plane. She suddenly thought back to Flight AV-231. Back then, she was just an anonymous passenger, asked to give up her seat. Today, she was still that woman, except she had turned her pain into something better for thousands of others. The next morning, the university auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, and even young entrepreneurs were there. When Maya stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She held no paper and spoke with sincerity. I'm not here to teach you leadership. I'm here to teach you compassion. Because without compassion, all leadership skills are meaningless. She paused for a few seconds, her eyes scanning the crowd. There were days when I was judged not by my abilities, but by the color of my skin and my gender. But those days taught me if I don't believe in my worth, I'll let others define me. And in this world, no one deserves to be defined by their appearance. The auditorium erupted in applause. Many students were in tears. A young woman stood up and asked, Dr. Ellis, what keeps you from losing faith when you are treated unfairly? Maya smiled. I think of my parents. They taught me that when people treat you badly, don't let it make you like them. Let your kindness shame them. That is the most powerful way to change. After her talk, many students ran up to take pictures with her. One male student said, You made me believe that kindness can be a strength. Maya gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Not only can it be, but it is the greatest strength. On the flight back, Maya sat quietly, eyes closed. She thought about the past 6 months. What had started as a small incident had spread like ripples, touching hearts in places she had never thought possible. She understood that true change comes not from power, but from daring to begin. As the plane landed in New York, she received a call from James Porter, Dr. Ellis. I just wanted to tell you that this quarter's report was fantastic. For the first time in history, AeroVista has the highest employee satisfaction rating, and customers are calling AeroVista the airline of the heart. Maya laughed. The airline of the heart. I like what they call it. Back in the office, she walked through the lobby. On the wall, a large screen showed pictures of smiling AeroVista employees. Under each picture was the caption, I'm not just flying planes, I'm flying people. She paused, feeling her throat tighten. Linda appeared behind her and whispered, I think you'll like this campaign. Maya turned back. I do, but more than that, I know we're actually flying. That evening, as the city lights came on, Maya sat in her office, watching the lights of the buildings reflect off the sky. She opened the window and breathed in the night air. Outside, an AeroVista plane flew by. She could see the airline logo glowing in the air, and in that moment, she knew all the pain, all the effort, all the tears had been worth it. She picked up a pen and wrote down the last line of the day in her notebook. Not everyone has the opportunity to change the world, But if we can change the way one person sees humanity, we have made the world a little better. The office lights were still on as the city slept, and high up on that floor, Dr. Maya Ellis sat there, quiet, strong, like the sky she helped change. A year after Flight AV-231 made international headlines, AeroVista is now a new icon of the American aviation industry. Profits and growth are just the tip of the iceberg. What's more impressive is how the airline turned a mistake into a remarkable turnaround. Business magazines have dubbed it the kindness revolution. Hashtags like Sykes Fly with Integrity, the human altitude, and the calm CEO still appear daily under hundreds of posts from passengers everywhere. This morning, Maya Ellis arrived at JFK not for a business trip, but to attend the one-year anniversary of Human Altitude Day, the day AeroVista officially launched the Human Altitude program. The main lobby was decorated simply in the airline's signature blue and silver, with large photos capturing memorable moments in the journey of change. A photo of Maya standing in the middle of the first-class cabin that day. An image of Mark teaching in a training class. Ethan smiling as he greeted passengers. And a photo of Charlotte Kane giving a thank you speech at a community event. Maya walked slowly through the crowd of employees gathered. Everyone wanted to take pictures with her. No one called her CEO anymore. They called her Dr. Maya. A young flight attendant approached, her eyes sparkling. Dr. Maya, it was because of your story that I dared to apply here. I want to fly with AeroVista because I believe this place respects people. Maya smiled, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder. Welcome to the sky. The ceremony began with soft music. James Porter opened with a brief speech. A year ago, we experienced the biggest media storm in the history of the company. But instead of hiding, Dr. Ellis chose to step forward, face it, and from there, we not only saved the company, but also found its soul. The audience applauded long and hard. Many moved to tears. When it was Maya's turn to speak, the lights dimmed. She stood in the middle of the stage, without a note, her voice low but warm. I will never forget the feeling of that flight, when I was asked to change seats, when I saw the discrimination, and when I realized that sometimes people just need a chance to be treated fairly. I am not angry at anyone, because if it weren't for that day, there would be no today. The auditorium fell silent, leaving only her voice to echo steadily. Today, AeroVista is not the biggest airline, nor the cheapest, but I believe we are the most loved airline, because here, everyone is seen, not for who they are, but for who they are. She paused, then smiled. I want to invite someone special up here, someone who taught me that change begins with admitting mistakes. A murmur spread through the hall as Mark Reynolds took the stage. He was wearing his new uniform, with the badge of the head of international training on his shoulder. He took the microphone, his voice trembling slightly. I was the one who made Ms. Ellis face injustice, but she didn't punish me. She gave me a second chance, and I promised to spend the rest of my life giving that chance to others. The applause was thunderous. Maya put her hand on his shoulder. You didn't just change yourself. You helped change us. Then the big screen lit up, showing a short video summarizing AeroVista's year-long journey. Images interspersed between flights, training sessions, staff smiles, and passenger thanks. At the end of the video, a quote appeared in the blue sky. Respect doesn't fly first class. It flies with everyone. The audience stood up and applauded. After the ceremony, Maya walked out onto the tarmac. The golden sunlight bathed the row of planes bearing the new logo silver wings spread out over a heart. She stood next to Ethan, who was now a flight instructor. "You know," he said, "I got a message from a deaf passenger today." He said that for the first time in his life. He felt comfortable flying because the flight attendants learned sign language from your program. Maya smiled. "See, Ethan, every act of kindness is a little wing, and it is those little wings that make the world fly." In the distance, Charlotte Kane approached. She was dressed simply, no longer the cold demeanor of the powerful woman she once was. In her hand was a donation check for the Sky for All Scholarship Fund that she and AeroVista had co-founded. Charlotte looked at Maya with sincere eyes. "I used to sit in seat 1A and thought I was above everyone else. But you made me realize no one is truly above everyone else if others have to bow down to you." "Thank you, Maya," Maya replied. "Thank you, Charlotte, for choosing to be part of the change." The two hugged, simple yet emotional. That afternoon, Maya returned to the office. On her desk was an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a photo of the AV-231 plane with the handwritten words, "This flight changed everything." Below were the signatures of the entire crew that day. She gently touched the photo, tears falling silently. At night, Maya stood on the roof of the headquarters, looking into the distance. The night sky was clear, the lights of the airplanes twinkling like moving stars. She called her father. "Dad, I wish you could see everything today." His voice was warm over the phone. "I don't need to see daughter. I just need to know you're flying in the right direction." Maya smiled. "I think I finally understand. Dad, flying high isn't about being above others. It's about seeing a wider world." She hung up the phone and looked up at the sky. The night wind blew gently, carrying the salty smell of the sea and the scent of freedom. In the dim light, she whispered, "Thank you, sky, for giving me a chance to start over." When an AeroVista plane took off, Maya watched until it was just a speck in the sky. She knew that somewhere on that flight, someone would smile, be treated fairly, have their name called, and that was all she had ever wanted. Before leaving, she opened the notebook she had carried throughout the journey and wrote the last line today. "I didn't just see the sky. I saw people." Then she closed the book, letting the wind carry away her laughter. The sky above smiled at her, the woman who taught the world that kindness can change flights. Dr. Maya Ellis's story is more than just a flight. It's a journey of self-respect, of soft yet steadfast strength in the face of prejudice. When asked to change seats because of the color of her skin, she responded not with anger, but with a calmness that made the world listen. She proves that sometimes silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. The greatest lesson we can learn, especially as we reach the middle of our lives, is that respect is not based on status or fame, but on how we treat each other every day. Whether in work, family, or life, humanity is the foundation that helps people soar, not power or money. Maya's story makes us wonder, if one day I am treated unfairly, how will I react? Will I get angry, stay silent, or choose tolerance to change what is wrong? Because sometimes, just one person keeping a good heart in the midst of the storm can make the whole world a little better. Thank you for listening to the story of Dr. Maya Ellis, the woman who taught us that calmness is the highest form of courage. If you feel inspired, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread more humane and hopeful stories. Because each of your shares can touch a heart that needs to be awakened.